33.
which is Exhibit 7, yes.
Okay, there.
So here, Damian Mendoza says, multiple members of the Scottsdale Police Department independently brought forward an allegation that on or about May 9th, 2019, at a staff meeting, Assistant Chief Slavin made a homophobic remark and then followed up by asking a meeting attendee about the attendee's sexual orientation during the meeting. See where I am there?
Yes.
Do you understand that to be one or two separate inappropriate comments?
2 or more.
Okay. But you didn't ask Chief Slavin about 2 or more inappropriate comments, did you?
No.
And this is in discrepancy with the apology email that Chief Slavin sent out to the members of the meeting, right?
This meaning the email is a discrepancy?
Correct.
Yeah.
And in Chief Slavin's interview with you that he did prior to you finalizing your investigation, Chief Slavin only admitted to one statement, correct?
I'm going to check that.
Okay.
I may get page numbers there somewhere. Can you tell me where that's at?
Yeah, I'll find it for you. So I believe it is at page 87, which is Exhibit 19. But my question is, specifically as you're reviewing this, why didn't you ask about the discrepancy between his policy, or his apology email, and Damian Mendoza's complaint?
I didn't compare those two to look for a discrepancy.
Okay. And were you concerned that based off of the apology email, only talking about one comment, that Chief Slavin might not have given the full story to Chief Rodbell?
No.
How would you know whether Chief Slavin gave the full story to Chief Rodbell?
I wouldn't.
And that wasn't something that you were supposed to investigate?
No, I had enough to sustain my finding. That's why I sustained that case.
Okay. Now, you had the interviews transcribed for all of the witnesses and for Chief Slavin and Chief Slavin's investigation, correct?
Yes.
And you reviewed those interviews transcripts prior to writing your report, right?
Yes.
You did not note any interview discrepancies at the time that you conducted your review, correct?
Meaning my interview discrepancies?
Yes.
No, I didn't know any discrepancies.
So at the time when you reviewed your interviews and when you wrote your report, you didn't realize there was a material discrepancy between Commander Minor and Lieutenant Bonnett's interviews, correct?
Yeah, I don't know what you're referring to, so no, I don't know about it.
Well, we're here because there's an allegation that comes later that Commander Minor and Lieutenant Bonnett's interviews are a discrepancy between them, right? Is that your
Oh,
understanding?
pardon me. Thanks for explaining. Yes.
Okay, but when you conducted your interview reviews, you didn't note a discrepancy the first time, correct?
Right, I didn't know it, yeah, in 48, that's correct.
And if you had noted discrepancies, you would have mentioned that in your report, or you would have followed it up with other interviews, right?
Yes.
Now, we do know, sitting here today, that the integrity investigation into Commander Minor was originally launched by a complaint made by Chief Slavin, right?
I don't know that.
You don't know whether Chief Slavin...
I don't know how it came to Chief Rodbell.
Okay. Were you aware that Chief Slavin had previously commented that Slavin was upset that Minor and Bonnett were making an issue of Slavin's comment at the Patrol Division staff meeting?
No.
If this is in fact true, would that be relevant?
I think it'd be relevant.
Okay. Are you aware that Assistant Chief Slavin had previously made an AR-333 allegation against Commander Minor, alleging that Commander Minor made disparaging comments about Assistant Chief Slavin behind Assistant Chief Slavin's back?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Are you aware that Assistant Chief Pop recommended against initiating an IA investigation in Commander Minor based upon the transcript review?
No.
Okay. Do you know whether at some point Assistant Chief Pop was removed from any role in overseeing the integrity investigations, Commander Minor?
No.
Okay. So I want to understand the specifics of the allegation that you sustained against Commander Minor. Is it that Commander Minor provided a false statement and that he said something that he deliberately knew was not true? Or is it that Commander Minor provided an incomplete statement that Commander Minor knew pertinent information that Commander Minor didn't volunteer?
Excuse me, I'm going to object to this question only because we were constrained from asking Sergeant Lewis to talk about all of the conclusions and the reasons which are stated in his report, and I was told not to read that into the record. So I think his report should speak for itself, and there's an entire conclusion section, many pages long, where he explains all of the reasons for the conclusions.
Mr. Salat?
I mean, the answer could be one or both. I don't understand the report the way that I read it.
I'll allow him to answer the question. I'll overrule the objection, and you can pick it up on cross-examination if you want to redress the portion that I restricted questioning about.
Sergeant Lewis, you can answer the question. It's either he lied, provided a false statement, he omitted pertinent information, or both. What did you conclude?
I'll take a look at my analysis. This keeps timing out, so I apologize. Would you please ask the question again?
Sure. My question is, was it your conclusion that Commander Minor offered false statements, incomplete statements, or both when you sustained your findings?
Both.
Okay. And specifically the false statements, we covered the ones that are related to this directly offended question. Were there any other false statements that you're alleging that he made?
I think that's it.
Okay. And you are not alleging, and no part of his discipline findings are based off of his statements in his second interview. Is that correct?
Well, part of that is the second interview for 085 that he did with us. Yes, in that he talked the sides directly offended.
I'm talking about in the second interview that Commander Minor did with you after he had his subject NOI. Are you saying that you sustained any of those statements that he made as false statements to support your discipline finding?
Objection, the record speaks for itself.
Love to know.
I think you can point in closing to his report. I'm not sure he can add anything because it's a formal report. He can't say anything else that he said in the report. And he's got to track what the report says. So in fact, you're asking to read the report.
Well, what I'm asking is if there is a finding of an integrity violation or false statements made in the second interview. It's my understanding there's not, but I want to make sure that I'm getting his intention in
Does
writing
the
the
report
report.
indicate that there was or there wasn't?
It doesn't say either way for my reading.
It doesn't say.
Okay. I'm going to,
Objection sustained.
so it's your testimony today that Commander Minor was required to volunteer certain information during his first interview?
Yes.
And that's the fact that he talked to Lieutenant Bonnet?
And all of that around Lieutenant Bonnet, not
Okay.
just the fact that he talked to Lieutenant Bonnet.
What about conversations with anyone else that he had related to the investigation? Or related to the allegations?
That wasn't part of my investigation.
Okay. So in your first interview, based off of the questions that you asked, Commander Minor had to report what he said to, what he talked about with Lieutenant Bonnet, but he didn't have to report any other conversations that he had with meeting attendees about people who had a problem with what Slavin said.
I didn't say that, I didn't say that in my report.
Okay. Well, help me out here, because in Commander Minor's second interview, he gives you a bunch of names of people that he talked with that he said were offended by Slavin's remarks, right?
Yes,
Many of those people you'd already interviewed, right?
right.
Did you ever follow up to determine if Commander Minor told the truth, that these people took offense to what?
So he talked to multiple people who weren't in the meeting
Okay.
to poll them and see them to ask them if they took offense. That wouldn't be appropriate for me to interview those people.
Well, he talked to some people in the meeting too, right? For example, he talked to Lieutenant DiPiazza.
Oh, yes, and that's in there.
Talked to Commander Leduc.
Yes.
Did you ever go back and follow up with them to see if Commander
I
Minor?
did not.
Why not?
I wasn't looking for an integrity violation on those things. I was dealing with integrity violation based on the first interview that I did with them in 048.
So the only person that you were looking for an integrity violation was Commander Minor?
Yeah, he was the only one who had an NOI, and he was the only one suspected of an integrity violation.
Okay. Even after Commander Minor said, I had these conversations with these other people that were offended, you didn't think that was worth following up?
Well, I think the follow-up was done by Sergeant Gallimar.
Okay. So I'm going to fast forward because I need your help related to notices of investigation, okay? What's a notice of investigation?
It's a document that we provide to people to let them know they're under investigation.
Are you required to give a notice of investigation if someone is going to ask questions regarding serious misconduct?
Meaning they're going to ask me about questions about serious misconduct?
If you're going to be asking somebody as a supervisor at the Scottsdale Police Department questions about serious misconduct, are you required to give the subject of your questions a notice of investigation?
No, there's a degree of initial fact-finding that goes on that doesn't have the NOI. Supervisors can still do the job.
Totally agree with you. And help me out with this. Is it true that fact-finding is done after you know what the allegation of misconduct is and who allegedly committed the misconduct?
Facts are continually found.
Okay, but I mean, there's a point where fact-finding ends and an NOI is required, right?
Oh, back to the NOI part? Yes.
So after you know what the allegation of misconduct is and who allegedly committed the misconduct, at that point you're required to give an NOI, right?
You should, most certainly.
And that's consistent with the Peace Officers' Bill of Rights.
Right.
Okay. So after Chief Slavin brought forward what he alleged were discrepancies, Chief Rodbell knew what the allegations of misconduct supposedly were, right?
I don't know what you know.
Okay. So there is an allegation that was made that sparked a second investigation that Commander Minor had provided false statements because of what Lieutenant Bonnet said, right?
Yes.
Should Chief Rodbell be asking questions in an unrecorded interview without an NOI about what statements were made?
I wasn't present. I don't know what discussion happened.
Okay, but after those, is there an exception to the NOI requirement for the Chief of Police?
There's no exception to the NOI.
And there's no exception to the NOI requirement under state law, right?
Yes.
So if Chief Rodbell knew what the subject of an investigation was and knew who was involved in the investigation, he shouldn't be asking questions without issuing an NOI, correct?
Typically, that's correct.
Okay. So let's talk about the follow-up interview that Commander Minor did with you. Let's talk about, because you testified before about tones of interviews. Do you believe that your tone personally changed between your first interview and your second, that he engaged in 52 times where he tried to deflect during his second interview?
Well, there's 3 or 4 parts of that where it's deflect and argue or misstate. I think there's one more.
Mislead.
Pardon?
Mislead.
Mislead, yeah. I counted between his written statement and our discussion and the interview, I thought he did that 52 times.
You found 52 instances of what you allege are misconduct in that second interview.
No, I'm not alleging it's misconduct. I'm saying he misled or he deflected. Sometimes the deflection is minimal, it doesn't rise to misconduct.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that the personnel board, and frankly me, I want to make sure that we understand if you're alleging misconduct or not. Because your testimony earlier that to deflect, mislead, or whatever the other one was, is misconduct.
I'm not alleging misconduct for that.
Okay, so the board should not consider 52 instances of misconduct in his
It's not up
second
to me
interview.
what the board decides to consider.
Okay, did you consider that when you wrote your report?
No, this is since I wrote my report.
So since you wrote your report, you then went back and discovered these 52 instances that you believe violated policy?
I've read the report many times since then. No, I'm not saying it violated the policy like I said a second ago.
You thought it was inappropriate,
Some of it's inappropriate.
but not all of these 52 instances are inappropriate?
Some of them might not be inappropriate.
But they should be included in a count of him not cooperating, is your
Yeah, I was
testimony?
asked a question and I answered it.
Mr.
Okay.
Savalik, I think you're beating that horse.
Sure, I'll move on. So Commander Minor provided his explanation of his understanding of the question you asked, right?
Yes, he did.
Did you discover at any point a motivation for why Commander Minor would deliberately lie to you?
No.
Sitting here today, it's your understanding that Commander Minor did not hide the displeasure of Bob Bennett from the report that he gave to Chief Pop, right?
I don't know exactly, but I don't think he kept anything from Chief Pop based on what I know.
Okay. And you never actually asked in your initial interview if Commander Minor had conversations with anyone else about what occurred, right? Your question was limited to those who were supposedly directly offended.
In 048?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, in his second interview, is it fair to say that Commander Minor was comprehensive in responding to the new NOI?
Yes.
And he provided additional individuals with whom he spoke, who he stated expressed offense, right?
Yes.
Did you follow up with any of those individuals?
I did not.
Did you ask more detailed questions in your second interview than you had asked in your first interview?
Sure I did.
Okay. I have some specific questions about your report and some context for what you wrote. Because you testified earlier that you have no changes that you'd make in your report, right? That it's factually accurate?
If I make changes to my report.
Is your report factually accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Let's take a look at page 119, in the background section.
Are you looking at 85,
I'm looking at page 119, which is...
What report are you talking about? Is the report of Commander Minor?
It is 85, yes, sir, I apologize.
Okay, and what is the page of 41 that relates to?
It is page 4 of 41,
Okay, thank you, that's all.
and it's
Unfortunately,
a...
I can't get the, what's the general page number, please? I'll forget it then.
119.
119, thank you.
For the record, it's city's page 2012, I'm sorry, 2112, 002.
And if I may, if it's helpful, Sergeant Lewis, there's a complete copy of that investigation in front of you that is clean with no marks or anything. So if it's easier for you to refer to just that complete copy, that might facilitate things.
Mr. Savalik just referred to the page of report 85. Maybe helpful, so you can use those. And this one, page 441.
I will give every reference available in the future to make sure the record's clear. Thank you all for your
It
assistance.
keeps popping back like you told me it might, so could you give me the,
It's page 441 of your report, sir. It's the one in the center, it says background in capital letters. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see it says page 441 pages.
441?
No, on the bottom right-hand side of your report, you paginated it and say, page so-and-so of 41 total pages.
Okay.
And what we want to have you look at is page 4 of 41.
4 of 41.
Right, in the center, it says
Thank you.
background in capital letters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just spell it.
So I'm gonna look at the very last paragraph there. And it says, there were 16 interviews conducted for this investigation. And then you wrote, it is very important to note that at the start of the investigation of IA 2019-48, it was not known whom the offended persons was because no one had supplied a name to Chief Rodbell, Assistant Chief Slavin, or Internal Affairs. You see where I am there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And to the best of your knowledge, that was true at the time, right?
Yes.
But now you know that those names had at a minimum been reported to Chief Pop, right?
That Lieutenant Rodbell had reported, Lieutenant Rodbell, sorry, that Lieutenant Fournette had been reported to Chief Pop, I knew that.
Right, and Commander Minor as well.
Yes.
Okay. So let's look ahead in your report, still in the background section for the purposes of your investigation. This is my page 120, which is 5 of 41 on your report.
I'm there.
And you wrote that you did not need an offended party to sustain the allegation you were investigating, correct?
That's correct.
But you thought that it was important for the attendees to know that IA was looking into the matter to assuage their concerns, right?
Sorry.
But it wasn't, the department had let this lapse for about 7 weeks, right, before IA investigated?
I don't know if the department let it lapse, I don't know what that means, but I know I was assigned it about 7 weeks after.
Okay. What steps did you take to assuage the concerns of Lieutenant Bonnet after you established him as an offended party?
Sitting there, listening to him, being empathetic to him while he cried, and while he talked about how hurt he was, and the way that I reacted helps people's emotions.
And he had waited 7 weeks for that conversation, right?
I assume it's 7 weeks.
Because he had immediately reported it to Commander Minor, right?
Yeah.
And Commander Minor had immediately reported it to Chief Pop,
I
right?
don't know when, if it was immediately or the day after, I don't know that, but it was contemporary to the event.
Okay. But certainly that was a bigger delay in assuaging Lieutenant Bonnet's concerns that this investigation didn't happen until weeks later, right?
I'm not understanding that question.
Okay.
So, would you please rephrase it or ask it again, please?
Sure, what's the bigger delay? The 7 weeks between the start of the investigation and the meeting, or the 1 business day between you being able to get to Lieutenant Bonnet quicker?
The 7 weeks?
Okay. Do you know who was responsible for that 7-week delay?
No.
Is it important to figure out who's responsible for that?
No.
Should there have been a 7-week delay in your opinion?
I don't know who told what to whom and what time frame it was. All I know is I started my investigation on the next date, and I went forward with it.
Okay. Okay. So, moving forward in your background section to Commander Minor's actions and the statements prior to your investigation, I'm going to reference some stuff that you wrote on page 121 of my exhibits, which is page 6 of your report.
Page 6 of 41.
Yes, sir.
I'm there.
So, Commander Minor told you in your first interview that he had gone to Slavin and informed Slavin that he was shocked that those words came out of his mouth in that manner they did. True?
He said he was shocked, but he didn't put any emphasis behind it.
So the transcript doesn't, we shouldn't look at the, when we're determining whether Commander Minor found those comments offensive on their face, we should rely on the tone or we should rely on the transcript primarily?
Rely on the tone of the transcripts.
Well-
That's confusing.
Sorry, I think those words, I apologize if I'm out of turn, but I think those words are in the actual transcript.
They are, we can look at that page if you want, it's page 42.
I'm just curious, is the Commander Minor said, quote, I didn't put any emphasis behind it, is that why that's why it's in italics? Okay, that's
Yes,
right.
sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Other, so, if council confirmed that that's what the transcript says, there's no reason to go back to the transcript. There were some indications that the transcript or what's in the report isn't consistent with what's in the record, but if council doesn't address it, I'll address it later. So let's go with that, so we're not going back to use it. And plus, you know, for the witness's benefit and those who are not attorneys, for the attorney to mislead a witness, that's probably going to be a problem ethically. So if they say, if I represent to you thus and so, they're going to be pretty accurate about it, or else there's a problem, okay?
Oh, meaning I can trust what they're
Yeah,
asking
you can
me?
trust what.
Yes, sir.
I certainly am not going to try to intentionally mislead you. I don't
It's on
want
the
to.
record, so.
Yeah, well, at any point in time. So, and you also knew at this point that Commander Minor had actually confronted Chief Slavin about Chief Slavin's comments, right?
Well, I don't know if he confronted him, but I know he spoke to him about it.
Okay.
I don't think he ever used the word confronting with me.
He certainly had told Chief Slavin that he thought what Chief Slavin did was inappropriate, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, continuing on your background section, which is page 122 of my exhibits, which is page 7 of your report, you initially described Lieutenant Bonnet as being seriously and personally offended, right?
I believe he was.
Okay. And at the conclusion of this paragraph, you use this information to conclude that Lieutenant Bonnet had been directly offended, right?
I believe he was directly offended.
Okay. But he never used the words directly offended at any time in his interview, right?
That's correct?
And you never actually asked him that question.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in your report, you wrote that Commander Minor had proactively disclosed his offense. It's on the top of the page. It's at the bottom. It's at the end of that first
Oh,
paragraph.
thank you. Yes. Yep. Days later. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was signaling to my assistant to grab the cable. I apologize. In this case, you didn't do any interviews on the weekend related to this matter, correct?
Not for this matter.
Okay. And you interviewed Commander Minor on a Friday, right? I can represent.
I'll trust you that it's Friday.
I can represent that. And then you conducted several more interviews the following Monday, right?
Yep.
And then you interviewed Lieutenant Bonnet on Tuesday, right? And I think that
I'm just going to go to my timeline.
I think the order of the interviews might be on page 59. That might help.
But that's your page 59?
Yeah, my page 59, which is Exhibit 17.
I don't have page 59. You know what it is? And I know it was days later,
Okay.
so I don't know if that's the...
And I want to make sure that I have this right too. Give me one moment.
They were on a Friday and a Tuesday.
Okay. So, based off of that information I can represent to you, the Commander Minor was interviewed on a Friday. Lieutenant Bonnet was interviewed the following Tuesday. Really, at the most, your investigation to get to Lieutenant Bonnet was delayed by about a day at that point, right?
No, delayed 3 or 4 days.
So you think you would have brought Lieutenant Bonnet in over the weekend?
Sure. I just interviewed 2 people on Sunday.
Okay. But at that point, even the 3 or 4 days, this investigation had already been delayed by well over a month by the failure to initiate the investigation, right?
It had been delayed that long, yes.
Okay. So let's go on to pages 125 and 126. And I think you,
Tell me what page it is.
yeah, it's pages 10 and 11 of your report.
Okay, there.
So I want to talk to you about the conversation that you had, because during your questioning, is it fair to say that you mischaracterized what you actually asked him the first time?
Who's the he you're talking about? Commander Minor?
Commander Minor.
What did you say? Did you act eagerly to even cross-examination? You could
So Commander Minor explained to you during his interview that he heard a difference between someone who was offended and someone who was directly offended, right?
Yes.
And then you write in your report that you were confused because it was basically the same question?
Yeah, I thought it was the same question.
Well, is it the same question or is it basically the same question?
Basically the same question.
Okay.
That's what I wrote.
But do you agree that in plain English, your word choice of directly narrowed the scope of who was offended to who was directly offended?
No, because I didn't say, was it offensive? I said, were you directly offended? Or do you know anybody who was directly offended? They took offense to that comment.
Well, they have to take direct offense, right?
They may have taken direct offense. I believe Lieutenant Bonnet took direct offense to it.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about the timing of this. So even though you don't agree with Commander Minor's interpretation, because he said consistently through the second interview that he interpreted that phrase differently than you interpret that phrase, right?
Yes.
And he actually said that in a written format prior to even starting your interview, right?
Yes.
He gave you a written documentation before he knew your questions to say, hey, I see what you're asking, this is how I took it differently, correct?
Yeah, he said he didn't even know what it meant.
Right. Well, and to be fair, you're saying the word directly means nothing, right?
No, I'm not saying that.
What does the word directly mean?
Like I've said multiple times, it means that someone personally took a direct offense to the comment.
Okay. And that's different than just saying someone's offended?
Yeah, there's a general offense and there's specific offense.
Okay. So in your interview, were you trying to establish what question you would have needed to ask for Minor to disclose Bonnet to you?
Yes,
Okay.
in 085.
Right, in 085. And Commander Minor told you unequivocally that he would have answered your question differently if he understood what you were asking, right?
I'd have to look that up if you want a specific answer to that, I'm sorry.
Sure. It's page 181.
Which is paper copy.
I don't have the paper copy, so if you go to page 181, it is exhibit 27, which is Commander Minor's second interview with you. And I'll just read it to you in case you have trouble
because I can't
getting it. So it's actually Sergeant Gallagher that asks, and the you in here is Commander Minor. Did the thought ever cross your mind in the interview that you did with Joel or after the fact? I know you did a follow-up interview of saying, well, I don't know anybody directly, but I do know I'm offended, and Lieutenant Bonnet was offended, and kind of going down the list. I mean, obviously you have knowledge, at least at that point, of you and Lieutenant Bonnet were offended, and for the sake of one word and kind of getting at what Joel's trying to get at, did you ever think of providing that information? Or just because he said directly, well, I'm not going to provide that information? And Commander Minor's answer was, no, George, if I had thought that was the intent, I would have absolutely said that. Clearly I was offended, and clearly Lieutenant Bonnet was. There's no reason for me to hide that information or mislead you or misguide you or make your job, Sergeant Lewis, more difficult to uncover, what occurred that day. But again, that's how I interpret the question. Do you recall that exchange?
Yes.
Do you think that's a bold-faced lie?
Yes.
What was, in your mind, sitting here today, what possible intent would Commander Minor have had to lie or withhold information?
I don't know intent.
What possible motive would he have had?
I don't know.
Well, there's some information that you know now that you might not have known then, that Commander Minor had already disclosed his offense at Slavin's statement in the command staff meeting. Is that fair?
That sounds right.
Okay. And if you want to reference it, just to know what I'm kind of looking at, it's page 132 of my exhibits, it's page 17 of 41 of your report is what I'm asking about.
Thank you.
Okay, but you knew that prior to writing that in your conclusions, that Minor had put Bonnet's offense, as well as his own offense, on the record to Pop over a month before you actually spoke with Commander Minor, right?
Object to the form of the question. With respect to record. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what record you're referring to.
So it's a quote from his report. So he says on page 132, which is page 17 of 41, Sergeant Lewis says, and he underlines it, this was the place to get it on the record. This was the place to tell it all.
Yeah, that's me talking to Commander Minor.
Okay. But at the time that you wrote this report, you knew that Commander Minor had already gotten on the record that he was upset about this in his conversation with Chief Pop, right?
Oh, by the time I wrote this?
Yes. Was that a yes?
Yes, I said yes.
Okay. And Commander Minor told you that he had followed up on the complaint that he made to Pop in the subsequent weeks, and that Pop told Commander Minor that Rod Bell was handling it, right?
That sounds right.
Okay. And Commander Minor told you that he was happy to go through anyone that he had talked to who had expressed any level of offense, correct? It's page 134 of the record, which is page 19 of 41 of your report.
We're talking about, I would have said that there were several people who I felt were offended by the remarks.
Right.
Okay.
So he told you in his interview that he'd be happy to tell you about them if he thought that that's what you wanted to know, correct?
Oh, at the end of that, yes, he does. He said he took notes on those individuals, and he'd be happy to go through all of them with me.
And he actually put them down on writing and gave them to you prior to the report, right?
Yes.
So he wasn't withholding any information from you there, correct?
No, he didn't have it prepared that day of the interview. That's right, he gave it to me sometime over the weekend.
Well, the PowerPoint that he gave you actually did include a discussion of a number of people who were offended, right?
It had a list of them.
Okay. And he volunteered that to you without even you asking? And you hadn't asked any questions yet in the second interview when he gave you that PowerPoint,
What he
correct?
volunteered was that there were other people who gave false information, and he only could recall Chief Slavin and Commander Duke at the time.
Okay.
So I said, I waited for it, he didn't have it, and then we agreed that he would send it to me, and I said to do it through you.
Okay. So you don't recall him actually giving you people in writing in the PowerPoint, the names of people that were offended by the statement?
In his written statement there?
Yes.
Yes, he did.
Okay. So I want to ask you some questions about the section about your interview with Chief Pop, which is on page 140 of the report, which is page 25 on your copy.
And there.
So you conducted this interview to corroborate the fact that Commander Minor had disclosed to Pop that both he and Burnett had been offended by Slavin's statements, right?
Yes.
And Pop told you that Minor made this disclosure, he told you about and had told Pop that both he and Bennett had been offended at Slavin's comments, right?
Yeah, called and offended.
Okay. And you actually asked whether Minor had specifically stated that Minor was reporting an AR 333 violation, right?
Yes.
What's the reason for this question? Do you have to use those words, I'm reporting an AR 333 violation for?
No.
Okay. Is that the standard used to determine whether an AR 333 investigation is open?
No.
Okay. So let's move forward to the last thing that Pop told you in his interview that you summarize in your report, which is on page 142. So it's page 27 of your report.
Okay.
Pop told you that he had notified both Slavin and Rodbell that Minor had made a complaint about Slavin's comments, right?
I told Commander Minor, oh yeah, at some point I told Slavin and Chief Rodville that I'd had a conversation with Minor. Yes.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
It did. So
Okay.
Chief Rodbell was absolutely aware of Commander Minor and Lieutenant Bonnett's statements based off of Chief Pop's recollection.
That's what Chief Pop was saying, correct?
Okay. So I have some questions about your analysis and applicable policies section, which is on page 143, so it's the next page. And you talk about the standard for Minor's answers as contemplated by GO 1411, that they need to be truthful and complete, right?
Yes.
And you talked about the fact that Minor would understand more than others the importance of answering truthfully and completely, correct?
Yes.
But you agreed previously that Minor was not subject to a different standard than the other witnesses that you interviewed, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so moving on to page 144 and 145, which is 29 and 30 of your report.
Okay.
And you said that context is important for you to understand different people's answers, right?
Yes.
And that was why you asked and you didn't ask Commander Minor certain questions during the Slavin investigation?
Yes.
But a significant point of context was that you were unaware that Commander Minor had reported the AR 333 violation to Pop prior to your investigation, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's correct.
Okay. And you have agreed that this action by Commander Minor actually follows the AR 333 policy?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And the next point of context is that Commander Minor knew that Bennett was seriously and personally offended by Slavin's comments in the command staff meeting, right?
Is that on page 30 now?
Yeah, I think it might have gone on to the next page.